In this lecture, part of the lecture on CSS, we'll talk about display. Display is very core to CSS. Now I have to understand that property, display. So the box model that we just encountered and box sizing, it really affects all elements. But there is a variation in which properties one is allowed to change in each element depending on the display value that it has. So that's what the text says. If we want to change things up here and just get a clearer explanation, we could say that the whole library of things we have available for us to do with CSS, what we can do on an element is defined by which kind of display value it has. So one can say that if I pick a display value on an element and all elements has a display value, they cannot decide on not having one, then it doesn't appear. It's not there. That display value is called none, actually. So if you have a value there, except for none, then you have the possibility of using a certain set of properties, but not all. And then if you change that value, you will have another set of properties available for you. So in a sense, display is a key. Is a key to say, so what do I want to happen with this element and how do I want it to react towards other elements? I go to display first and I say, what kind of properties do I want to be able to be using? What should I be able to use? And it's decided here in display value. So it's really core. It's like the key. If you don't have it, you don't get the properties. You don't get to use them ever, the ones you want. So you really need to know this display thing. So the value can have several different values. It can affect changes of margin, padding, border, width, height, and all of that. And the whole layout techniques, for example. And actually, there are keywords. And these are the keywords. There are block, inline block, table, flex, and grid. There are more. Like I said earlier, there's this one called none, but there's also more than that. But this is what we really need to focus on. And to be honest, most of the course is going to be about flex and grid. But you definitely have to understand that the standard default way of things within CSS, nothing is this flex and grid. Right off the bat, flex and grid is kind of new. If you think about when CSS was created, they haven't been around as long. So block, inline, they are the oldest ones that we have. And then we have, of course, inline block and table, which is a bit later, but much earlier than flex. And then came flex, and then after that came grid. And they all handle different things. But with that said, I want you to know that block and inline block, these are the three core things that will always be there, even though we will be focusing on flex and grid, which is the more of the future. So let's look at what these do. Over to Visual Studio Code. And again, I'm just going to take this weird website that we've just started creating. And I think, there you go. There you have it. And this web page is now showing the red and the blue, and you know these two since we just saw them in the last part of this lecture. So let's look at what we can do. Display block. If I type display block on this one, let's do it. Display block. You will see nothing change. And it's really because this element, the P element, is a block element by default. But let's go in here and I'll add this called span. You'll see this happening a lot. Father, and I'll remove this. So I have span. I save it. It doesn't change anything visual here right now, but I've used span. Now this one, span here, it is something entirely different. It's an inline element. So let me just take care of that span, and I'm just going to use as an element selector right now. Take span, and I'm going to make that. Could I make that text farther? I could make it bold and white. So color, white, and I'll make a good practice with using FFF right now. And then say font weight. And instead of typing numbers, I'll just type bold right now. But you can be sure that these are actually, it's better to use the numbers. Maybe I could just take the boldest one and I do it there. You can see that we have the father is white now and it's also bold. So we can actually see without you knowing right now the difference between these two. What block does, it always by default take up a whole row by itself. So nothing can stand on the next to it. Not unless you unlock those possibilities using kind of display flex or display grid later on. Then when you use them in certain contexts, you can actually change the way block levels behave. But as of right now, when we don't, you see it actually, P element is on a row, and then this one is not next to it, even though there is space around here, it is actually put afterwards. And that is how blocks works. There are like blocks, that's what they call blocks. They are like taking up a whole block and then taking up the next block. And then if I would have an extra element down here, a block level element, that would just go to the next row, even though they were spaced to the right. So that's the block. Now the inline, it does what it says as well. It does things inline, in text. They are suitable for when things are to be in line with text. So there's a lot of content, a lot of text here. Imagine that it is. We want this content to not stand on its own row. So like father standing on its own row. But if we wanted it to, we could say display block and save. And suddenly it demands that it stands by itself on this row. Okay. That is very cool, right? Because now we've just decided that there are two types of element display values there. Either an element has this block thing, and most of elements do actually, or they have this inline thing, and then it's probably those inline things are used for handling things inside of text. And that is also true. It's a very logical thing to think about. And then there came, situation where you wanted stuff to function differently. So for example, if I right now want to show you, I'm removing this block thing and I'm adding a margin and I'm saying 20 pixels on this father thing. So can you see I get 20 pixels? I get it to the left and to the right, but I don't get it top and bottom, because if I had gotten it top and bottom, there would have been a very weird row length. The row height, sorry. There would be a distance between each row. So there's just a restriction here. I cannot put a margin above and below an inline element. If I go with padding now, I'm gonna first, before I take padding, I'm gonna change the background here. So I go background and I'll change it to something horrible like pink, and we have it there. And I like pink, but I don't like it in this case. So padding, and then we go with 10 pixels. And sorry. So you see, we got 10 pixels on each side. It was okay. It worked. Now let's go with border then. And we take 2 pixels and we say solid black and save. And we got that as well. So we could do the padding above, on, below, and to the sides, and we could also do that for border. But for margin, it was restricted. We could not add distance above and below. We weren't able to reach that property. We couldn't change that property because we had an inline element. You know, that is what I said earlier, because you lock away or unlock, whether you see it as one or the other, doesn't really matter, when you just change display value. So block really has more values that you can use, more properties you can change when using block. But if you're inline, you are more restricted. Now, should you never use inline? Of course, you should use inline. They are the purpose for how we treat things inside of text and how we treat things so they follow with the text. For example, if there's no more room for father right now, it would jump down to the next level. Now there's always going to be more room for father because I can't make this short small enough. But this whole thing follows text. And then if I then imagine, sometimes I want images inside of text. I want an image to follow around there. And that would require me to make adjustments. So I would need some kind of way of actually handling the margin above and below that image. Therefore, this value of inline block was created. And suddenly, I can actually have something that follows the text, not stands on its own row, but I can still apply a margin above and below it. So this is practically what an image does. See? So just because I used an inline element, that doesn't mean I'm bound to having it being an inline element forever. I can change it to an inline block. I can change it to a block. I can change it to a lot of things, actually. So that is the difference between these three. And then we have the so-called table. Table is, well, I had to mention it because making a table, not a wooden table, a table of things you see in Excel. You do that. When you do that, you want to have the abilities a table generally has, and there is a display value that gives us the abilities we want within a table. I don't think you need to know much more than that, but just know that it exists and it's kind of default for tables. We don't have to change it. It's always there. Now, in the future, we'll get into this Flexbox and CSS Grid, which is really powerful. Actually, we'll take it in the next big lecture that we have. Not in this lecture about CSS Fundamental. Will be the lecture about layout techniques. But now, I think we'll get ahead and take the next part of this lecture.